No matter how far you are going to do a presentation at the end in the presentation sessions. So we are not going to expect you all to be finished with your 12-page proposals. And next week we are going to make an assessment of how far you are and what should everybody do. So we'll put together what must be presented as part of your proposal, because your presentation is slightly different from what you've written. And then if you're at a certain level, what stage presentations do you have as options? And how are you going to go around analyzing these things? Okay. Welcome. Okay. Let's look at it. Your proposal, what you put together as your 12th page, the purpose is pretty much the same kind of thing as your actual 150 words. But your certainty around your 150 words is much less than your certainty around your 12th page. So what you might be doing, if you've put together a 150 words abstract and your problem has changed, you have to resubmit the abstract. And if they're the same, you just submit your previous abstract. But the basis on which you register a title is your abstract. So if you already have a title registered, if you now want to change it, redo your abstract. But your 12th page, then start looking at a little bit more. And people want to be able to make this judgment. They want to know that you are going to do it, it's likely going to succeed, and you're not going to violate ethical practices. So the kind of analysis, the kind of evaluation people do when they look at your 12th page is pretty much intense. And what is going to happen is that you're going to present something from a specific design, and not everybody believes in the same design. In management science, there are so many different philosophies, so many different approaches, that you have to make it explicitly clear what you have to do, and you've got to substantiate those choices so that people would agree that this is possible. Okay. Your concept or your actually your 150-page abstract is sort of a 50% accuracy, but you're now moving into an 80% accuracy. And the more literature and the more underlying stuff that you've done, the more accurate you can be. So you might look at it and say, I can be a very simplistic kind of thing and I can put it together and it can look beautiful. But when I operationalize it, it's not going to work. And that's great, you get your proposal accepted, but then you have to redo the thing so many times afterwards to make sure that it's doable. There is a template. Please make sure that you use the right template and that you actually have the current. There's some changes in the version. Yep.
I'm going to ask a couple of questions. Is this the template that our faculty uses?
Yes.
What date is the newest version?
I don't want to think about this.
So the reason I'm asking Mr. Davida and Mr. Naidu have got 12-page proposals already in draft form. I'm just wondering, is that the latest template that you're using?
Well, that's the latest stuff that must be in the template. The latest one is on the YouTube as well.
They're not that much different. Here and there a few words. And I have a lot of other things that I've put in there. Basically, they give these headings. And what we've done is that we've gone through proposals that have gone through, and we've done some interpretation. Now what you'll see in here, there's no separate chapter for literature review. And hopefully most of you have engaged quite deeply with your literature. You can get through here without your literature review. You might just get a lot of nasty surprises later. So we'd prefer you to do your complex detail and then just simplify it together to get it through. So the first part of your proposal, and I've broken them out in spots, really deals with your problem, its substantiation, and the way that you've structured it. So assignment 1, 2, and 3. Okay, the introduction. What you're trying to do here is you're convincing your reader, meaning your supervisor and people that are not that familiar with your area, that this is a great idea. Now it first goes through the druk. People in your druk should have a fairly okay idea of what this is about. But it also goes through the faculty committee. So please don't make assumptions about what people know and what the definitions are. When you put together your introduction, remember we've asked it, put together that golden hook. Make a statement that clearly aligns with that golden thread. So make a statement that is aligned with your title. And then you start telling people that by the time they end here, the problem is correct. You don't have to state your research problem. You have to do all the things that talk about your research problem, because your second heading is your research problem. When you do your research problem, you don't repronounce something. So in your background, everything that gets people to say, yes, this is a problem, it's a great problem, you're at the right level, must be there. It must be sharp and to the point. Now when you put together your final work, you might expand this up to 10 pages, 5, 10, whatever, the introduction. But then you try and introduce your problem a little bit earlier to get people aligned. We've spoken about the research problem earlier today. That's very important. You extract it, and it's a trade-off. Just because you want to do it doesn't mean that it's a good research problem, and it doesn't mean it's an appropriate research problem for research. It must be relevant, it must contribute, and it must be doable. If it doesn't meet those criteria, you're wasting your time and everybody else's. You must be able to execute it. So in order to get your problem, you should have gone up and down that loop a few times so that you've done the checks. Can I actually do it? Do I have ethical access to solve this problem? Is there enough literature? Is there no literature around my contribution if I'm at a doctoral level? All of those things. So that when I pull it together, I have my golden thread. And your proposal also has to have a golden thread. There has to be a very clear line of argument. It's not separate bits. Okay. So your introduction deals with this bit. I've put together my hook, I've described my context, and I have led my reader to my problem. And one of the last bits in my introduction really deals with, and why is there no suitable literature or evidence or knowledge that I can use? At a doctoral level, has to be, there is nothing in the body of knowledge. At a master's level, there is nothing precisely applicable in the body of knowledge. Go through that. Problem is the key to everything. So the suggestion that we went through about how to go around writing the introduction is going through this systematically to construct sentences that tell you hook, context, statement, etc. So I want to know, and those sentences that I'm putting up now, each of those sentences will lead into a total paragraph. But in order to make sure that my paragraphs follow logically, I have to be able to summarize what every paragraph say by one sentence. If I can't do it, I might have actually put two different paragraphs together and I've got to separate them. And those sentences that I make of the paragraph should be logical. And it should actually lead a person. If that doesn't happen, my paragraphs are flying around and my poor audience don't know what the heck I'm saying. I do not want to confuse the reader. The moment I confuse the reader, I make them feel idiotic and they're going to respond nastily with red pens and nasty comments. Don't want to feel a person that I don't know. The next heading after the introduction is around the problem. A problem is a phenomenon leading to consequences. Your problem should be one sentence. It should be sharp. It should be centered. It should be explicitly clear. Nobody wants to lead through about 50 paragraphs to find out somewhere in there is a problem. Explicitly, clearly, your problem is the key to the whole thing. If you haven't defined your problem, then we don't really know what you're doing, do we? Okay, step 2. You're then putting the thing together for your introduction, and you start unpacking it, and you're writing the evidence, and you're putting these things together. Now your title, and remember you are registering your title very formally now, and you're getting more clear on the title, and if you've got your 150 words, you want to use the same title. Your title words is exactly the same words in your problem. If there's a misalignment between your title words and your problem words, then you've lost that golden thread. Then you don't know what you're doing. So in there, which is the predominant protocol, would be an action word if you're using that. You have to have the variables in there. You've got to have a relationship between the variables. You've got to have possibly a strategy of the research, possibly the context, and it should be in under, I think people get tense, really tense, around 15 words. But ideally around 10 words. Okay, now the next heading is your research objectives. Okay, go back there to what we said in there. You put your research, introduction, problem, objectives. And the heading they have is the aims and purpose of the study. Now, if you put your research problem, you actually just change that problem into the aim. Because the aim is basically exactly the same words, but instead of saying this leads, it is I want to solve this problem in order to. So the next thing that you're starting to put together is you start putting your research objectives. The first thing that you put in the aim of the, and this is just a recipe. The aim of the research is to solve this problem in order to. Write that beautifully down. And then you put down your objectives. Your objectives are, first, the objectives that you want to do with literature. Then, or your main of primary research question, and then all the things. So the first thing that you want to do is, the aim is to do that, or the research scope is to do it. The delineation is to do that. What's the scope of my delineation? My primary objective is my primary research question. You can state that as a hypothesis. My literature objectives is whatever I need to answer with my literature. And my empirical objectives is whatever I want to answer my literature sub-questions. Not my literature, my research sub-question. Then you have to say, what's my assumptions? Be clear about those. The contribution will be the following, and a very clear articulation about what my body of knowledge contribution is going to be. Practice and body of knowledge. The next heading the next thing is around the motivation. It is to address the needs. So when you put together address the need, what's the need in theory, what's the need in practice? Link that to your understanding of the need. At a doctoral level, this has to be clearly stated in terms of a body of knowledge contribution, and it's got to be linked to the benefits to the stakeholders. So understanding the owners of the problem is important there. And overall, it has to be linked to the developmental imperative in South Africa. That is fairly sensible. Now, the next heading in your proposal is a bit of a difficult one to understand. What you're putting there is your conceptualization. Now, what the conceptualization is, how are you thinking about this problem? You probably have to understand the philosophy, your ontological or if relevant or your epistemological underpinnings. Then you have to tell me what are the key constructs, variables, things that you're going to measure, and the theoretical perspectives on this thing. If I'm measuring, say I'm measuring motivation, what theoretical underpinnings do I have? What are my key variables? What do I mean with my key variables? I really tell people, how do I think about this research? What are the rules of your game? You may add a theoretical model or a conceptual model, whatever. There's a difference between a model of concepts and a conceptual model. Okay. Literature, you're not putting in your literature here. You're talking about the theory. How do you think things work? Theories of motivation, some old ones. This doesn't tell you about the current debate. It tells you about how the theories work. Then you go into your second part of your proposal. And here you're really talking about the way that you're going to go around getting evidence to answer the question. Now, the actual requirement here is not a detailed theoretical literature review. We're going to discuss what they require. Basically, they want to have the design fundamentally of how you're going to go do your literature. But if you haven't done a literature review, you know that the certainty by which you can answer this thing is going to change as you get deeper into your literature. So the more detailed literature you have, the more important. And the rest of it really talks about your research design. So what you'll see is that your research design, or assignment 4 and 5, is really very important here. Okay. Geographical demarcation, we're going to do it. Straightforward, there's no issue there. Your literature review is what you actually state. What they want you to do is to state that you're really fully aware of what the current knowledge in your research area is. In level M, you've got to understand the knowledge literacy, that you demonstrate the ability to evaluate current process of knowledge's production, etc. It's like assignment 4, it's just shorter, it's not your full review. And at D literature level, you really have to clearly articulate where the lack is. Now, what they require is that at D level, you should at least have an annexure that explains why there's a lack of body of knowledge. But in fact, what we will be requiring of you is that you have as an annexure a fairly detailed literature review. And the more complete that literature review is, the more likely it's going to be that your process goes through in any case, because we can see that you've already engaged with the subject deeply enough. You have to tell us where that literature should be done. From assignment 3, you know where the literature should be done. This is the way that you actually go through your structuring of your literature review. But when you put it into your proposal, okay, you should be talking about things like the introduction to your literature review, what's your framework of your literature, what literature are you going to look at, your background literature to the problem. What will your objectives be? You don't have to answer those yet. The basics underlying your literature, your empiric questions, a brief summary of the things that will lead to your empirical design, and your annexure with your detailed literature review, or at least that part of your literature review that clearly shows the gap. Why do you not have literature around that? There's a suggestion there that you put together your search query. Now, any one of you that have done a search query will know that this is not really, you can't put together that I've pulled the question together and there was nothing exact. It's doing a literature review is a heck of a lot, literature searches is a heck of a lot more than just putting 1 or 2 question words in there. This is not going to be good enough. If you've done a detailed review, and it really should be done, put it as an annexure and refer to it, because you can't put an annexure and then expect people to read that annexure unless you've introduced it. Then you've got to talk about your empirical study. Now, the empirical study really talks about how you're going to get the evidence. And it must be congruent, and we have actually discussed a lot of what's got to be there earlier this afternoon. Basically, you want to pull together how you're going to you're going to support that argument. Outside layers, first specify that outside layer. Then specify the tactical layer. What are you going to do? Then specify your data collection and analysis. It doesn't have to be miles. When you do a multiple research, in fact, most of your designs, rather do a diagrammatic how you're going to put them together. It makes it a lot easier to explain, and a picture tells 1,000 words. People are not that likely to be confused. Specify at least the following things. We've dealt this earlier. Be careful when you choose a design, and you have to prove the congruence. So depending on what your research problem, if we read your proposal and we see your research problem and your research design has got nothing to do with each other, then we know you haven't thought about this. And then your research proposal isn't going to go through, because obviously you don't know how to link your problem and the evidence. So you haven't thought about this. So this part is really, really important. Make sure that your strategy and your tactics align. Consider triangulation and make sure that you can do it and that your supervisor is happy with it. Please put together a diagram. There is a diagram as an annexure. That diagram is really very logical if you're doing positivist work. If you're not doing positivist work and you're following another kind of design, it might not be the easiest. But you have to put together a similar type of diagram that clearly shows people how you're going to do that. Somebody must follow it. Keep the things separately, don't just pull them together. Okay, and deal explicitly with the issues of quality. Generalizability, validity, and reliability, but you can also use credibility, dependability, transferability, and confirmability. The heading contingency analysis and limitation, from the way you've structured your problem, it comes from your research design, and it also comes from your response. But by now, you haven't yet got your response. So the limitation based on 3 and at level 5, assignment 5 has to be there. And what you've done to deal with the limitations. Typically, if you do mixed method, you would say that this design would have this limitations, I've added this, or I have an issue here possibly around understanding, so I have added this kind of, say, I'm doing triangulation or something like that. Basically, you want to know, and this is an if necessary part. You don't have to do this. If it's necessary, if you've done things around it, you put it in there. Ethical considerations. Understand what the ethical issues. Remember those headings which I asked you, this could be an issue, this could be an issue, this could be an issue? Be sure around those. You want to know what are the possible concerns and how have you addressed it. You can't go through your full ethical clearance unless you've got your instruments designed in detail, and we'll do that later. But people have to have a very good idea what you've done around ethics already, so that approving this proposal is going to not be totally shot down, this specific proposal from an ethical perspective. These are the checklist. Any of these could give you ethical concerns. So, what is it? Do you have issues around companies and organizations and how they get involved? Do you have issues regarding your use of a human subject? Do you have issues around service to the community? Do you have issues around conflict of interest? Do you have issues around occupational health and safety? And if you have these issues, how have you dealt with them? Then there's a heading around record keeping. Now remember, TOT regulations is that you have to keep the records of your research for 5 years. So when you look at record keeping, what is the records that you're keeping? Are you keeping your original data, or do you maybe have to destroy that from an ethical perspective? What is it that you're keeping? Are you keeping your final report? Obviously, you have to keep your final report, and that's being kept by TUT. Where? Are you going to destroy things? Remember that bit. Then it's how you're going to keep it. I'm going to keep it on a laptop. When is the laptop going to get stolen? I'm going to keep it on CD. Where is it going to keep? Who's got access there? In what way can it be misused? You've got to keep that evidence, and you've got to make sure that that evidence is stored securely, because if you need to bring that evidence together, it could be really, really nasty. And it is not unconceivably that universities can do a random sampling. You are selected to actually be audited if this has been done. This could be happening. And I think in many cases people are moving towards doing that. Who will keep it? You, your supervisor, the department? And very often it makes a heck of a lot of sense to put your evidence, the stuff that is not a big issue, to put that on CD and add it in the document that's being stored by the department. Okay? When you're starting to deal with evidence that has to be kept secure, that has certain implications, and you've got to deal with how to keep that. Then the last part of your proposal is the practical parts. The provisional chapters concomitant with the time frames, the budget dissemination, and then they don't have a conclusion. But the problem with many of these proposals, they're sort of in the sky. You've got to pull them together and just provide that final bit of your golden thread. Your provisional chapters, people just put the headings and they put it in a table. That looks really messy. So typically you want to put a narrative, you want to put a table in. What's your chapter? Now the traditional design is chapter 1 introduction, chapter 2 literature, chapter 3 research design, chapter 4 results and analysis and results, chapter 5 discussions, or something like that. You may have a different frame, and there are some of you that might have a chapter 1 introduction, chapter 2 literature, chapter 3 context analysis, chapter 3, etc. So the way that you're pulling together your research design, your overall design of your work will enable you to work out what that chapter is going to be. What is in it? It doesn't help to say introduction, just basically say what it's going to do and then when it's due. Now, although we pretend that we finished chapter 1, then we finish chapter 2, etc., you know that these things are still actually drafts, because you can go back and you should go back and make sure they align before you hand in your final documentation. But we need to report when there would be a very, very, very final draft that has been reviewed, etc., already in there. Report linearly. The next thing that you have to pull together is you have to talk to the budget. And the budget is really important. You have to be very complete, realistic, and affordable. What is it that you need money for? How much do you need it? And who's going to pay for it? Okay. Is it your own funding? Does it come from the university? Now, some of these things gets funded by the university, some don't.
Yes, so can I just say that the university will fund your linguistic editing and your final printing and binding.
And it provides some statistical support.
Yeah, but the statistical support that will not be paid for. It will be statistical support.
It's available.
Available inside the organisation.
But if you want somebody else?
For those of you that are staff members, there is a budget for you to do things. For those of you that aren't staff members, you need to talk to your supervisors to find out whether they have budget for these items. Otherwise, you need to know from the start that the items will be for your own pocket.
And certain research designs tend to be more expensive. Focus groups, for example, it's not a cheap thing to do. Okay. So you have to consider accommodation. You've got to consider issues of travel. You've got to consider preparing those questionnaires. In some cases, people use pre-designed questionnaires that you've got to pay for. You've got to consider the issues of our data capturing. Is somebody going to type it for you? Are you going to use a data entry clerk? You've got heaps and heaps like this. Give it to somebody. There are literally people that sit and enter these things. Okay? can pay for them. Are you going to do photocopying and printing? Are you going to pay for postal expenses? When you distribute those things, it could be fairly expensive. You've got it, and it's got to be sent back. And this couldn't work, so you've got to do a second round. Or you can do something with SurveyMonkey or whatever it is that you're going to use. Your linguistic editing, as it's said, is being supported. However, if you provide them something that is a little bit better, it will be much quicker and more elegant. And don't expect them to add meaning to your sentences. They're doing linguistic editing. They're not rephrasing your pathetic words in a way that makes an argument. Okay. And this is really, really an issue. A lot of people don't understand, but your language is the way that you're conveying your argument. If it's not possible for you to convey a meaningful argument, you are really going to struggle. You will not get your degree. An editor cannot convey your argument on your behalf. You've got to be able to do that. And then statistical support and final printing.
Sorry, I think a little bit more on linguistic editing needs to be discussed. Surely the language editor will not be rewriting the sentences.
No, they will not.
Doing technical editing and looking at the citations and the references.
Maybe, I don't know if they actually check the citation.
They'll fix the grammar and spelling.
So my is and r's and r's
Yes.
and is.
Yes, that they'll fix.
But they're not going to go around, you know, this sentence doesn't really do it for me. Phrase it in this way. They're not going to do that. That you've got to do.
They shouldn't actually be doing that because they might be changing the meaning.
Or they're adding meaning to your argument, and they can't be adding, it's not their degrees, it's yours. So your articulation of your argument must be your own. You must be able to do that. And there is, in some cases, serious issues. There are universities that now basically do not want you to use the editor whatsoever. And they actually do that final language checking they would do for you and make sure that nothing was added.
Okay, let's say, as an example, a student really struggles to write the 12th page in English. Should it then be sent to someone like an English lecturer to fix it up? Or should that student
There are
English language
deep philosophical disagreements between that. There are deep. There are people that say, yes, you can use language support, and there are people that don't.
My view would be that the view of TET would be that we would need to put in assistance for that student in the form of English language training.
Or you can go to a language support. You take your work, they work with you. They don't do it for you. They work with you, and you've got to do most of that. And many universities provide that. So they will provide language support. They won't rewrite. So, and it's really important. Okay? Dissemination costs a lot. But remember that by, say for example, enrolling with a doctorate, you are committing to preparing an article. Okay. So, how much would colloquiums be? What levels of colloquiums do you have? Is it going to be internal, or is it going to be external colloquium where you present your work on a forum? Doctoral colloquium, high-level doctoral colloquium, you present your work, you get a lot of input. Are you doing presentations to your stakeholders? Sometimes during your research process, you are required to present to certain stakeholders for them to approve or to do validity checks or things like that. You might be doing local conferences, typically talking about 5,000 Rand a shot for your conference fees. And if it's a 3-day conference and you're going to Cape Town, another 3,000-4,000 Rand at least for your accommodation. Probably, if you look at your flats, accommodation, another 8,000 Rand. Where's it going to come from? Okay. International conferences, even more. Now, if you're a staff member, there's certain funds for it. If you're not a staff member, your supervisor might have funds or they might not have funds. Or your company might support you. I see those gleams saying, how am I going to get my company? Okay. There's really serious cost, but it's incredibly important that your quality of your work is immensely improved by the process of disseminating at conferences, because you get input. You present that at a conference, people jump on your neck and they give you all kinds of things. Have you thought about this and this? And the quality of your work has a tremendous improvement through that. Happiness, yeah?
If a student does not have the funds and the supervisor neither, is the conferences a graduation requirement?
No.
The article as the graduation requirement?
Yeah. But you know, depends on how you want to do that. If you are a staff member, there's different processes. So whatever you make part as a dissemination, how will it be done? You might find very often that what happens is that you would be preparing as a student the conference, but your supervisor would be presenting that. And in that you will then put under the funding, this is a supervisor presentation, part of supervisor's budget, something like that. Then your conclusion, very short and to the point, what will be achieved. Once again, you basically just restate your contribution and what you will achieve. Annexure A is either your detailed literature review or at least a survey showing that this work has not been done. Show the design of your literature review, your findings and your results. Analyze, at the doctoral level, analyze what is out there and why is that not sufficient. Then the diagram, you may want to put it in Annexure B, or you may put your own one there. This is actually the ground. If you stood looking and you want to put it into 12 pages, we've done a fairly intensive analysis of trying to find out where your balance should be based on what's gone through. Your introduction should be 2.5 pages. This is really, really important. You're putting things together there. You're presenting your argument about why this is there. Your problem statement, maximum of 1/2 page. Maximum, it should actually be shorter. Purposes of your study objectives is 1/2 page. Your conceptualization, where you deal with what the constructs are, the concept, defining your variables, all of those things, 1 page. Geographical demarcation, less than 1/4 page. If you look at your research framework, your literature first part, 2 pages. So you're really looking at your 25 pages or longer, and you want to put it into 2 pages. Then you've got your research design for your empirical thing, 2.5 pages. Your contingency analysis, if you put that applicable, 1/2 page. Your ethical considerations, 1/2 page. Your record keeping, provisional chapters, all of the last bit, 1.5 pages. That gives you 12 pages.
So, Dr., I just want to find out both parts, because this proposal is divided into 2. Both parts should be ready for presentation.
No. No. What we're going to go through tomorrow, this is if you're ready for your final thing. What we're going to go, next week is going to tell you what you've got to present. But ultimately, people are looking, your panel is going to look at this if you finish your proposal. Now, the reality is that you've got to look at the TUT expectations. And what we've put down there is what is expected in your final document by TUT, okay, at a master's level, out of 200. And what is expected in your final document, okay, that was the rubric. And I've handed that out last week. There's copies of it, it's pasted. And there's the D. This is what's expected. So these are the kind of things. So if your proposal does not enable you to do this, does not give people a very, very good indication that you're going to be capable, they're not going to approve it. And we've got requirements, we've got a fairly detailed rubric of how will we go looking at your proposal. What is incredibly important is that all of you have to have your portfolio of evidence. You have to basically have evidence on how you have participated in this course. Now we have where you have approved, and I hope all of you have signed at all the right times when you have attended. We have those of you that have submitted assignments, but you have to prove that you've participated. Okay? And it's very important. You've got to have your journal. You've got to tell us, if you have your memorandum of understanding, you've got to have your memorandum of understanding with your supervisor. Those of you that haven't got it or whose supervisors haven't yet been assigned, you basically have to have their statement that you did not have a supervisor, but this is your preliminary agreement with a potential supervisor. You've got to give me your project plan. How did you want to go about it? How did you think you were going to do that? And actually, how have this changed? And why did that change? You've got to tell us the feedback log. What feedback did you get and how have you incorporated it? And we have some of those records. We know what feedback we've given you. Have you taken that on board, or are we repeatedly trying to give you feedback and it just doesn't go in? Okay? You have to have minutes with the various forms of minutes. Basically, we're going to look at those kind of things. And you have to prepare this. So final requirement for this course would be, what have you done? All the versions, all your improvements, all of those things have to go in there so you can see it. Now, the 8th of August, which is next week, which is the day before the public holiday, we're really going to look at where you are. And what we're going to have there for you is we're going to say you can do version 1, 2, 3, or 4 of the presentation. Version 1 would be your full presentation of your proposal. We know that most of you won't be there. But then you might have version 2, which is nearly full, version 3, which is at a certain level, or version 4. So we'll basically have 4 alternatives which you can present. And you, together with your supervisor, because don't even think of presenting or handing in something if your supervisor hasn't agreed on it, because that's going to be really, really problematic, will then have to be ready and present where you are. We want you to get the formative feedback from the panel. So even if you haven't done the whole thing, we want the DRIC's input onto where you are so that you know that you have a better chance of finalizing and you know what they think about this.